yesterday. Yeah, and fuck. Now we're finally in fucking August. Um, I know time's just I was just flying this year. Basically, I felt like the year just started, and now we're on August 2nd already. Um, I'm gonna be a busy guy. I don't know how much I'm gonna be able to put out for videos on live streams because starting Monday, I start my second job. So not only am I gonna be doing two jobs, but I'm also gonna have college starting up on the 19th. So I don't know how much time I'm gonna be able to put in for making these videos during those time frames. Uh, Today we're gonna talk about the Achaemenid Empire. Um, the Achaemenid Empire, or also the Achaemenian Empire, which was also referred to as the Persian Empire, or the First Persian Empire, um, or the kingdom, was an Iranian empire founded by Cyrus the Great of the Achaemenid dynasty back in 550 BCE. Um, it was based in modern day Iran, and it was the largest empire by that point in history, spanning a total of 5.5 million square kilometers, or 2.1 million square miles. Um, the empire had spanned from the Balkans and Egypt in the west and most of West Asia, the majority of Central Asia to the northeast, and the Indus Valley of South Asia to the southwest. Um, Around the 7th century BCE, the region of Persis in the southwestern portion of the Iranian plateau was settled by the Persians. Um, Now, from Persis, Cyrus rose and defeated the Median Empire, as well as Lydia and the Neo-Babylonian Empire, marking the first establishment of a new imperial polity under the Achaemenid dynasty. Um, Now, in the modern era, the Achaemenid Empire has been recognized for its imposition of a successful model of centralized bureaucratic administration. Now, its multicultural policy, building complex infrastructure such as road systems and an organized postal system. Um, the use of official languages across its territories and the development of civil services, including its possession of a large professional army. Um, its advancements inspired the implementation of similar styles of governance by a variety of the later empires that would join. By the year 330 BCE, the Achaemenid Empire was conquered and defeated by Alexander the Great, an ardent admirer of Cyrus. The conquest marked by a key achievement in the then ongoing campaign of his Macedonian Empire. Um, Now, when Alexander the Great died, his death marked the beginning of the Hellenistic period, when most of the fallen Achaemenid Empire's territory came under the rule of the Ptolemaic kingdom and the Seleucid Empire, both of which had emerged as successors to the Macedonian Empire following the partition of um, Chyperidessus in 321 BCE. Um, The Hellenistic rule remained in place for almost a century before the Iranian elites of the Central Plateau reclaimed power under the Parthian Empire. Um, Now, the Achaemenid Empire borrows its name from the ancestor of Cyrus the Great, the founder of the empire Achaemenius. Now, the term Achaemenid means of the family of the Achaemenius, or the which is Old Persian, um, and it's a compound translating to having a friend's mind. Um, the Achaemenius was himself a minor 7th century ruler of the Anshan in southwestern Iran, and a vassal of Assyria. Around Around 850 the original nomadic people who began the empire called themselves the Parsa, and their constantly shifting territory Persua, for the most part localized around Persis. The name Persia is a Greek and Latin pronunciation of the native word, referring to the country of the people originating from Persis. Now, the Persian term literally meaning the kingdom, was later used to refer to the empire that was formed by their multinational state. Um, Now, the Persian nation contains a number of tribes as listed here. You had the Pasag, the Pasargadae, the Merafi, and the Masfi, upon which all of the other tribes are dependent. Now, of these, the Pasargadae are the most distinguished, and they contain the clan of the Achaemenids, from which spring the Perseid kings. Other tribes are the Panthalai, Durusii. Not sure if I'm saying all these names right. Now these are all of now these tribes are all of which are attached to the soil, and the remainder of the Dai, the Mardai, the Japasi, the Sagarti are basically nomadic. Um, Now the Achaemenid Empire was created by nomadic Persians. Now the Persians were Iranian people who arrived in what is today Iran around 1000 BCE, and they settled around the region, including northwestern Iran, the Zagros Mountains, and Persis along the native Elamites. Now the Persians were originally nomadic pastoralists in the western Iranian plateau. Now the Achaemenid Empire may not have been the first Iranian empire as the Medes, another group of Iranian people, but they possibly established a short-lived empire when they played a major role in overthrowing the Assyrians. Um, Now the Achaemenids were initially rulers of the Elamite city of Anshan near the modern day of Mardasht. The title king of Anshan was an adaptation of the earlier Elamite title king of Susa and Anshan. Um, Now there are conflicting accounts of the identities of the earliest kings of Anshan. According to the Cyrus Cylinder, the oldest extant genealogy of the Achaemenids, the kings of Anshan were Tispis, Cyrus I, Cambyses I, and Cyrus II, who was also known as Cyrus the Great, who founded the empire. Um, The later Bahishtan inscription that was written by Darius the Great claims that Tispis was the son of Achaemenius, and that Darius also descended from Tispis through a different line, but no other text mentions Achaemenus. In Herodotus' histories, he writes that Cyrus the Great was the son of Cambyses I and Mandane of Media, the daughter of Astyages, who was the king of the Median Empire. Around 550 BCE, Cyrus revolted against the Median Empire in 553 BCE, and in 550 BCE, he succeeded in defeating the Medes, capturing Astyages and taking the Median capital of Ecbatana. Once in control of Ecbatana, Cyrus styled himself as the successor to Astyages and assumed control of the entire empire. Now, by inheriting Astyages' empire, he also intended for the territorial conflicts that the Medes had with both Lydia and the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Around 540 BCE, King Croesus of Lydia sought to take advantage of the new international situation by advancing into what previously had been Median territory in Asia Minor. Cyrus led a counterattack which not only fought off Croesus' armies, but he also led the capture of Sardes and the fall of the Lydian kingdom in 546 BCE. Now Cyrus placed Pactius in charge of collecting tribute in Lydia and left. But once Cyrus had left Pactius and instigated a rebellion against Cyrus. Now Cyrus sent the Median general Mazaris to deal with the rebellion, and Pactius was captured. Mazaris, and after his death, Harpagus set about reducing all the cities which had taken part in the rebellion. The subjugation of Lydia took about 4 years in total to get under control. Um, Now, when the power in Ecbatana changed hands from the Medias to the Persians, many tributaries to the Median Empire believed their situation had changed, and they revolted against Cyrus, and this forced Cyrus to fight wars against Bactria and the nomadic Saka in Central Asia. Now, during these type of wars, Cyrus established several garrison towns in Central Asia, including the Syropolis. Um, Now, around 530 BCE, nothing is known of the Persia-Babylonian relations between 547 and 539 BCE, but it's likely that there were hostile that there were host, that there were plenty of hostilities between the two empires for several years, leading to up to the War of 540 to 539 BCE and the fall of Babylon. In October of 539 BCE, Cyrus won a battle against the Babylonians at Opis. Then he took Sippar without a fight before finally capturing the city of Babylon on October 12th, where the Babylonian king Nabonidus was taken prisoner. Um, Upon taking control of the city, Cyrus depicted himself in propaganda as restoring the divine order, which had been disputed by Nabonidus, who had promoted the cult of sin rather than Marduk. Um, and he also portrayed himself as restoring the heritage of the Neo-Assyrian Empire by comparing himself to the Syrian king Ashurbanipal. Now, Cyrus is credited with freeing the people of Judah from their exile and with authorizing the reconstruction of much of Jerusalem, including the Second Temple. Um, Now, in 530 BCE, Cyrus died and was succeeded by his oldest son, Cambyses, his eldest son, Cambyses II, while his younger son, Bardia, received a large territory in Central Asia. Now, here is the Cyrus the Great's tomb, as you can see here. And this is at Pasargadae. We'll click on that for a second, and that will show you where it's at. Um, this actually is a national tourist site administered by the Iranian culture. Um, it's close to Shiraz. Shiraz is in Iran. Um, yeah, so it's listed in Iran. That's where the Pasargadae is, and that's where Cyrus the Great's tomb is. And it's a big thing for people to see throughout the years. Now, by 525 BC, Cambyses had successfully subjugated Phoenicia and Cyprus and was making preparations to invade Egypt with the newly created Persian Navy army. Now, Pharaoh Amasis II had died around the year 526, and he had been succeeded by Psamtik III, resulting in the defection of key Egyptian allies to the Persians. Psamtik positioned his army at Pelusium in the Nile Delta, and he was defeated by the Persians in the Battle of Pelusium before fleeing to Memphis, where the Persians defeated him and took him prisoner. After attempting a failed revolt, Psamtik III promptly committed suicide, supposedly. Now, Herodotus depicts Cambyses as openly being antagonistic to the Egyptian people and their gods, cults, temples, and priests, in particular, distressing the murder of the sacred bull Epsis. Now, he says, um, now he says that these actions led to madness that caused him to kill his brother Bardia, who Herodotus says was killed in secret, his own sister wife, and Croesus of Lydia. He then concludes that Cambyses completely lost his mind, and all later classical authors repeated the themes of Cambyses' impiety and madness. Now, however, this is based upon spurious information as the epitaph of Epsis from 524 BC shows that Cambyses participated in the funeral rites of Epsis himself as a pharaoh, even though I don't think he was considered one. Following the conquest of Egypt, the Libyans and the Greeks of Cyrene and Barca in present-day eastern Libya, surrendered to Cambyses and sent tribute without a fight. Um, Cambyses then planned invasions of Carthage, the oasis of Emanon and Ethiopia. Now Herodotus claims that the naval invasion of Carthage was cancelled because the Phoenicians, who made up a large part of Cambyses' fleet, refused to take up arms against their own people, which I don't blame them. Um, Now, modern historians doubt whether an invasion of Carthage was ever planned at all. However, Cambyses dedicated his efforts to the other two campaigns, aiming to improve the empire's strategic position in Africa by conquering the kingdom of Meroe and taking strategic positions in the western oasis. Now, to this end, he established a garrison at Elephantine, consisting mainly of Jewish soldiers who remained stationed at Elephantine throughout Cambyses' reign. Um, now, the invasions of Aman and of Ethiopia themselves were failures. Herodotus claims that the invasion of Ethiopia was a failure due to the madness of Cambyses and the lack of supplies for his men. Um, Now, archaeological evidence states and suggests that the expedition was not a total failure, and a fortress of the second cataract of the Nile on the border between Egypt and Kush remained in use throughout the Achaemenid period. Um, Now, the events surrounding Cambyses' death and Bardia's succession are greatly debated, as there are many conflicting accounts to the story. Now, according to Herodotus, as Bardia's assassination had been committed in secret, the majority of Persians still believed him to be alive. Now, this allowed two Magi to rise up against Cambyses, with one of them sitting on the throne, able to impersonate Bardia because of the remarkable physical resemblance and shared name, Smyrdes and Herodotus' accounts. Now, Ctesias writes that when Cambyses had Bardia killed immediately, he put the Magus Spinpadates in his place as a satrap of Bactria, due to remarkable physical resemblance. A lot of people looked alike back then, according to List, basically. Now, two of Cambyses' components then conspired to usurp Cambyses and put Spinpadates on the throne under the guise of Bardia. According to the Bahestian inscription that was written by the following king, Darius the Great, a magus named Gamata impersonated Bardia and incited a revolution in Persia. So whatever the exact circumstances of the revolt, Cambyses heard news of it in the summer of 522 BC and began to return from Egypt. Since they didn't have TV back then, the only way they would hear these type of news is letters and word of mouth from people. He heard so whatever the exact circumstances of the revolt, Cambyses heard news of it in the summer of 522 BC and began to return from Egypt. He was wounded. He was wounded in the thigh in Syria and died of gangrene. So Bardia's impersonator became king. Now the account of Darius is the earliest account, and although the later historians all agree on the key details of the story, that a magus impersonated Bardia and took the throne. This may have been a story created by Darius to justify his own usurpation, but Iraniologist Pierre Bryant hypothesizes that Bardia was not killed by Cambyses, but he waited until his death in the summer of 522 BC to claim his legitimate right to the throne, as he was then the only male descendant of the royal family. But Bryant says that although the hypothesis of a deception of Darius is generally accepted today, nothing has been established with certainty at the present time, given the available evidence that we have today. Now, according to the Bahestian inscription, Gaumata had ruled for 7 months before being overthrown in 522 by Darius the Great. The Magi, though persecuted, continued to exist, and a year following the death of the first pseudo Smyrdes, Gaumata saw a second pseudo Smyrdes Um, Bahai Bahai as Dada attempted a coup. The coup, though initially successful, would fail. Um, Herodotus writes that the native leadership debated the best form of government for the empire around 520 or 510, basically. Ever since the Macedonian king, um, um, uh, let's see, Amentis, Amantis, the first surrounded his country to surrendered his country to the Persians in around 512, 511 BC. Macedonians and Persians were strangers no more as well. The subjugation of Macedonia was part of a Persian military operations that was initiated by Darius the Great from 521 to 486 and 513. After immense preparations, a huge Achaemenid army invaded the Balkans, and they tried to defeat the European Scythians roaming to the north of the Danube River. Now, Darius the Great's army subjugated several Thracian people and virtually all other regions that touched the European part of the Black Sea, such as parts of the modern-day Bulgaria, Romania, Ukraine, and Russia, before it returned itself to Asia Minor. Um, Now, Darius the Great left in Europe one of his commanders named Megabazus, whose task was to accomplish conquest to the Balkans. Um, the Persian troops subjugated the gold-rich Thrace, the coastal Greek cities, and defeated and conquered the powerful Pannonians. Finally, Megabazus sent envoys to Amyntas, demanding acceptance of the Persian domination, which the Macedonians did. The Balkans provided many soldiers for the multi-ethnic Achaemenid Empire and army. Now, many of the Macedonian and Persian elite intermarried, such as the Persian official Bubarus, who married Amyntas' daughter Gagia, and family ties that the Macedonian rulers Amyntas and Alexander enjoyed. The Bubarus ensured them good relations with the Persian kings Darius and Xerxes I, who was known as Xerxes the Great. Now, the Persian invasion led indirectly to Macedonia's rise in power in Persia and some common interest in the Balkans with Persian aid. The Macedonians stood to gain much at the expense of some Balkan tribes, such as the Pannonians and Greeks. All in all, the Macedonians were willing and useful Persian allies. Now, Macedonian soldiers fought against Athens and Sparta and Xerxes I's army. Now, the Persians referred to both Greeks and the Macedonians as Ionians, and their term for Greeks, and to Macedonians specifically as Yona Takabara, are Greeks with hats that look like shields, possibly referring to the Macedonian Chalcea hat. Now, by the 5th century BC, the kings of Persia were either ruling over or had subordinated territories encompassing not just all of the Persian plateau and all of the territories formerly held by the Syrian Empire, Mesopotamia, the Levant, and Cyprus and Egypt, but beyond all of this, the Anatolia and Armenia, as well as the southern Caucasus and parts of the North Caucasus, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Bulgaria, Pannonia, Thrace, and Macedonia to the north and west, and most of the Black Sea coastal regions, parts of Central Asia as far as the Aral Sea, the Oxus and Jakartas to the north and northeast, but the Hindu Kush and the western Indus basin, corresponding to modern Afghanistan and Pakistan, and to the far east parts of northern Arabia, and to the south and parts of eastern Libya, to the southwest, and parts of Oman, China, and the UAE. Now here is this statue thing up here is the Persian queen um Atossa, who is the daughter of Cyrus the Great and sister wife of Cambyses II, and Darius the Great's wife and mother of Xerxes the Great. Um, Down here you got a coin, or what looks like a carbine or something. Oh yeah, cause that's a Greek hoplite and Persian warrior depicted fighting on an ancient kylix around 5th century BC. Um, Now the Ionian the revolt in 499 BC, which was like the start before the Greco-Persian War, um, and associated revolts in Aeolus, Joris, Cyprus, and Caria were military rebellions from several regions of Asia Minor against Persian rule, which this war lasted from 499 to 493 BC. At the heart of the rebellion was the dissatisfaction of the Greek cities of Asia Minor with the tyrants appointed by Persia to rule over them, along with the individual actions of two Milesian tyrants, Hystatius and Aristogoras. In 499 BC, the then tyrant of Miletus, Aristogoras, launched a joint expedition with the Persian satrap Artaphernes to conquer Naxos and attempt to bolster his position in Miletus, both financially and in terms of prestige. The mission was a debacle, and sensing his imminent removal as a tyrant, Aristogoras chose to incite the whole of Ionia to rebellion against the Persian king Darius I, who was commonly known as Darius the Great. Now the Persians continued to reduce the cities along the west coast that still held out against them before finally imposing a peace settlement in 493 in 493 BC on Ionia that was generally considered to be both just and fair. Now, the Ionian revolt constituted the first major conflict between Greece and the Achaemenid Empire, and as such represents the first phase of the Greco-Persian War. Asia Minor had been brought back into the Persian fold, but Darius had vowed to punish Athens and Eurasia for the support of the revolt. Now, moreover, seeing that the political situation in Greece posed a continued threat to the stability of his empire, he decided to embark on the conquest of all of Greece. The first campaign of the invasion was to bring the territories in the Balkan Peninsula back within the empire. The Persian grip over these territories had loosened following the Ionian revolt. In 492 BC, the Persian general Mardonius resubjugated Thrace and made Macedonia a fully subordinate part of the empire. And it had been a vassal as early as the late 6th century BC, but retained a great deal of autonomy. However, in 490 BC, the Persian forces were defeated by the Athenians at the Battle of Marathon, and Darius I would die before having the chance to launch an invasion on Greece. Now, Xerxes, which is Old Persian meaning hero among kings, was the son of Darius I. He vowed to complete the job. He organized a massive invasion aiming to conquer all of Greece. His army entered Greece from the north in the spring of 480 BC, meeting a little or no resistance through Macedonia and Thessaly, but was delayed by a small Greek force for 3 days at Thermopylae. Now, a simultaneous naval battle of Artemisium was tactically indecisive as large storms destroyed the ships from both sides. The battle was stopped prematurely when the Greeks received news of the defeat at Thermopylae and they retreated. But the battle was a tactical victory for the Persians, giving them uncontested control of Artemisium and the Aegean Sea, which is what Menelaus wanted, and so did his brother Now here is a Achaemenid king fighting hoplites, a seal and a seal holder. Um, Now, following his victory at the Battle of Thermopylae, Xerxes sacked the evacuated city of Athens, and he prepared to meet the Greeks at the strategic isthmus of Corinth and the Saronic Gulf. In 480 BC, the Greeks won a divisive victory over the Persian fleet at the Battle of Salamis, and they forced Xerxes to retire to Sardis. Now, the land army which he left in Greece under Mardonius retook Athens, but was eventually destroyed in 479 BC at the Battle of Plataea. Now, the final defeat of the Persians at Makale, or Makale, whatever you want to call it, encouraged the Greek cities of Asia to revolt, and the Persians lost all of their territories in Europe, with Macedonia once again becoming independent of a nation. Um, Now, Artabanus, the commander of the royal bodyguard and the most powerful official in the Persian court, assassinated Xerxes with the help of a eunuch, um, Aspamertris. The exact year and date of Xerxes' assassination is basically disputed among many historians. They don't know when what year he was assassinated, um, but who knows? Um, Now, after Xerxes the first assassination, he was succeeded by his oldest son, Artaxerxes the First. It was during his reign that Elamite ceased to be the language of government, and Aramaic language gained importance. Um, it was probably during this reign that the solar calendar was introduced as the national calendar. Under Artaxerxes, the first, Zoroastrian became the de facto religion of the empire. Now, after Persia had been defeated at the Battle of Eurymedon around 469 or 466 BC, military action between Greece and Persia was halted. Now, when Artaxerxes the First took power, he introduced a new Persian strategy of weakening the Athenians by funding their enemies in Greece. This indirectly caused the Athenians to move the treasury of the Delian League from the island of Delos to the Athenian Acropolis. Now this funding practice inevitably prompted renewed fighting in 450 BC, where the Greeks attacked at the Battle of Cyprus. After Simon's failure to attain much in this expedition, the peace of Callias was agreed between Athens, Argos, and Persia around the 449 BC. Now, Artaxerxes also offered asylum to Themistocles, who was the winner of the Battle of Salamis. After Themistocles was ostracized from Athens, also, um, um, Artaxerxes gave him magnesium, mysis, and Lampsacus to maintain him in bread, meat, and wine. In addition, Artaxerxes the First gave him Palisepsis to provide him with clothes, and he also gave him Percoti with bedding for his house. Now, these are Achaemenid gold ornaments that are held in a Brooklyn museum. You can see those here. Now, when Artaxerxes died in 424 BC at Susa, his body was taken to the tomb already built for him in the Naksha Rostam necropolis. It was Persian tradition that kings began constructing their own tombs while they were still alive. Artaxerxes the First was immediately succeeded by his oldest and only legitimate son, Xerxes the Second. However, after a few days on the throne, he was assassinated. While drunk by Pharnaxius and Menelsanus on the orders of his illegitimate brother, Sogdianus, who apparently had gained the support of his regions. Now Sogdius had reigned for only 6 months and 15 days before being captured by his half brother Oceus, who had rebelled against him. Um, Sogdius was executed by being suffocated in ash, because Oceus had promised he would not die by the sword, by poison, or by hunger. Acchus then took the royal name Darius II, and Darius's ability to defend his position on the throne ended the short power vacuum. Um, Now, from 412 BC, Darius II, at the insistence of Tissaphernes, gave support first to Athens, then to Sparta. But in 407 BC, Darius' son Cyrus the Younger was appointed to replace Tissaphernes, and aid was given entirely to Sparta, which finally defeated Athens in 404 BC. Now, that same year, Darius fell ill and he died in Babylon. His death gave an Egyptian rebel named Amyrtaius the opportunity to throw off Persian control over Egypt. At his deathbed, Darius's Babylonian wife, um, Paryasatis, pleaded with him to have her second eldest son, Cyrus the Younger, crowned. But Darius would refuse. Um, Now, the queen, Paryasatis, favored Cyrus more than her oldest son, Artaxerxes II. Um, Plutarch relates, probably on the 30 of Ctesias, that the displaced Tissaphernes came to the new king on his coronation day to warn him that his younger brother Cyrus the Younger was preparing to assassinate him during the ceremony. Um, Artaxerxes had Cyrus arrested and would have had him executed if their mother, Queen Paryasatis, had not intervened. Now Cyrus was then sent back as satrap of Lydia, where he prepared an armed rebellion. Now Cyrus assembled a large army, including a contingent of the 10,000 Greek mercenaries, and made his way deeper into Persia. Now the army of Cyrus was stopped by the royal Persian army of Artaxerxes II at Cunaxa in 401 BC, where Cyrus was killed. Now, the 10,000 Greek mercenaries, including Xenophon, were now deep in Persian territory and were at risk of attack. So they searched for others to offer their services, but eventually they had to return to Greece. Um, Now, Artaxerxes II was the longest reigning of the Achaemenid kings, and during this 45-year period of relative peace and stability that many of the monuments of the era were constructed, um, Artaxerxes moved the capital back to Persepolis, which he greatly extended. Also, during the summer, capital at Ecbatana was lavishly extended with gilded columns and roof tiles of silver and copper. The extraordinary innovation of the Zoroastrian shrines can also be dated back to his reign, and it was probably during this period that the Zoroastrianism spread from Armenia throughout Asia Minor and the Levant. Um, the construction of temples, though serving a religious purpose, was not a purely selfless act, but they served as an important source of income. From the Babylonian kings, the Achaemenids adopted the concept of a mandatory temple tax and one-tenth tithe, which all inhabitants paid to the temple nearest to their land, on another source of income. Um, Now, Artaxerxes II became involved in a war with Persia's erstwhile allies, the Spartans, who under Agesilaus II invaded Asia Minor, and to redirect the Spartans' attention to Greek affairs, Artaxerxes II subsided their enemies, in particular the Athenians, the Thebans, and the Corinthians. Now, these subsidies helped to engage the Spartans in what would become known as the Corinthian War. Um, now in 387 BC, Artaxerxes II betrayed his allies and came to an arrangement with Sparta. And now in the Treaty of Antocidas, he forced his erstwhile allies to come to terms. The treaty would restore the control of the Greek cities of Ionia and Aeolus on the Anatolian coast to the Persians, while giving Sparta dominance on the Greek mainland. In 385 BC, he campaigned against the Caduceans, although successful against the Greeks. Artaxerxes II had more trouble with the Egyptians, who had successfully revolted against him at the beginning of his reign. Now, in an attempt to reconquer Egypt in 373 BC, it was completely unsuccessful. But in his waning years, the Persians did manage to defeat a joint Egyptian-Spartan effort to conquer Phoenicia. He squashed the revolt of the satraps in 372 to 362 BC. But he is reported to have had a number of wives. His main wife was Mustateria, until she was poisoned by Artaxerxes II's father in about 400 BC. Another chief wife was a Greek woman of Phocaea, named Aspasia, and not the same as the concubine of Pericles. Artaxerxes II is said to have had more than 115 sons from 350 different wives. Back then, it wasn't uncommon to have more than one wife. Now, in 358 BC, Artaxerxes II died, and he was succeeded by his son Artaxerxes III. In 355 BC, Artaxerxes III had forced Athens to conclude a peace which required the city's forces to leave Asia Minor and to acknowledge the independence of its rebellious allies. Artaxerxes started a campaign against the rebellious Caduceans, but he managed to appease both of the Caducean kings. One individual who successfully emerged from this campaign was Darius Achaemenid, who later occupied the Persian throne as Darius III. Now, Artaxerxes III then had ordered the disbanding of all the satrapal armies of Asia Minor, as he felt that they could no longer guarantee peace in the West, and was concerned that these armies equipped the Western satraps with the means to revolt. Now the older, however, was ignored by Artabazos II of Phrygia, who asked for the help of Athens in a rebellion against the king. Athens sent assistance to Sardis. Orontes of Mysia also supported Artabazos, and the combined forces managed to defeat the forces sent by Artaxerxes III in 354 BC. However, in 353 BC, they were defeated by Artaxerxes III's army and they were disbanded, which was not uncommon back then. Now, Orontes was pardoned by the king, while Artabazos fled to the safety of the king to the court of Philip II of Macedon. Now, in 351 BC, Artaxerxes embarked on a campaign to recover Egypt, which had revolted under his father Artaxerxes II. At the same time, a rebellion had broken out in Asia Minor, which being supported by Thebes, threatened to become serious. Levying the best army, Artaxerxes invaded Egypt and engaged in fighting with Nectanebo II. After a year of fighting, the Egyptian pharaoh Nectabano inflicted a crushing defeat on the Persians with the support of mercenaries led by the Greek generals Diophantus and Lamius. Artaxerxes was compelled to retreat and postpone his plans to reconquer Egypt, but soon after this defeat, there were rebellions in Phoenicia, Asia Minor, and Cyprus. Now, here's a base. Here's a Darius base at the Archaeological Museum of Naples, and then to the right here is a detail of Darius with the label in Greek, giving him his name. Now in 343 BC, Artaxerxes committed responsibility for the suppression of the Cyprian rebels to Idrius, prince of Caria, who employed 8,000 Greek mercenaries and 40 triremes commanded by the Phocian Phocian the Athenian, and Amagoras, son of the elder Amagoras, the Cypriot monarch. Now Idrius succeeded in reducing Cyprus. Artaxerxes initiated a counteroffensive against Sidon by commanding Lysias, a satrap of Syria, and Mazaeus, the satrap of Sicilia, to invade the city and to keep the Phoenicians in check. Now both satraps suffered crushing defeats at the hands of Tennis, the Sidonese king, who was aided by 40,000 Greek mercenaries that were sent to him by Nectanebo II and commanded by the mentor Rhodes. As a result, the Persian forces were driven out of Phoenicia. Now after this, Artaxerxes personally led an army of 330,000 men against Sidon. Artaxerxes' army comprised of 300,000 foot soldiers, 30,000 cavalry, 300 triremes, and 500 transports on provision ships. After gathering this army, he sought assistance from the Greeks. Even though he was refused aid by Athens and Sparta, he succeeded in obtaining 1,000 Theban heavy armed hoplites under Lacrates, 3,000 Argives under Nicostratus, and 6,000 Ionians and Dorians from the Greek cities of Asia Minor. Now this Greek support was numerically small, amounting to no more than 10,000 men, but it formed altogether, with the Greek mercenaries from Egypt who went over to him afterwards, the force on which he placed his chief reliance and to which the ultimate success of his expedition was mainly due. Now the approach of Artaxerxes sufficiently weakened the resolution of Tennis that he endeavored to purchase his own pardon by delivering up to 100 principal citizens of Sidon into the hands of the Persian king, and then admitting Artaxerxes within the defenses of the town. Artaxerxes had the 100 citizens transfixed with javelins, and when 500 more came out as supplicants to seek his mercy, Artaxerxes consigned them to the same fate. Sidon was then burnt to the ground either by Artaxerxes or by the Sidonian citizens. 40,000 people died in the conflagration. Now Artaxerxes sold the ruins at a high price to speculators who calculated on reimbursing themselves by the treasures which they hoped to dig out from among the ashes. Now Tennis was later put to death by Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes later sent Jewish people who supported the revolt to Hyrcania on the south coast of the Caspian Sea. Now the second conquest of Egypt. Now this reduction of Sidon was followed. This reduction of Sidon was followed closely by the invasion of Egypt. In 343 BC, Artaxerxes II, in addition to his 330,000 Persians, had now a force of 14,000 Greeks furnished by the Greek cities of Asia Minor, 4,000 under Mentor, consisting of the troops that he had brought to the aid of Tennis from Egypt. 3,000 sent by Argos and 1,000 by Thebes. He divided these troops into 3 bodies, and he placed at the head of each a Persian and a Greek. Now, the Greek commanders were Lacrates of Thebes, Mentor of Rhodes, and Nicostratus of Argos, while the Persians were led by Asus, Aristoxenes, and Bagos, the chief of the Enochs. Nectanebo II resisted with an army of 100,000 men, of whom 20,000 were Greek mercenaries. And Nectanebo II occupied the Nile and its various branches with his large navy. Now here's a relief showing Darius the First offering lettuce to the people, to the Egyptian deity Amen Ra Kabatuf, Temple of Ibis. Down here you have the 24 countries subjected to the Achaemenid Empire. Now, okay, so now the character of the country intersected by numerous canals and full of strongly fortified towns was in favor. And Nectamano II might have been expected to offer a prolonged, if not even a successful, resistance. Now, however, he lacked good generals and overconfident in his own powers of command. He was outmaneuvered by the Greek mercenary generals, and his forces were eventually defeated by the combined Persian armies. Now, after his defeat, Nectamano hastily fled to Memphis, leaving the fortified towns to be defended by their garrisons. These garrisons consist of partly Greek and partly Egyptian troops, now between whom jealousies and suspicions were easily sown by the Persian leaders. As a result, the Persians were able to rapidly reduce numerous towns across Lower Egypt and were advancing upon Memphis when Nectamano decided to quit the country and flee southwards to Ethiopia. The Persian army completely routed the Egyptians and occupied the lower delta of the Nile. Following Nectamano fleeing to Ethiopia, all of Egypt submitted to Artaxerxes. The Jews in Egypt were sent either to Babylon or to the south coast of the Caspian Sea, the same location that the Jews of Phoenicia had earlier been sent to. After this victory over the Egyptians, Artaxerxes had the city walls destroyed, just like the Berlin Wall was destroyed back years ago. They started this reign of terror and it set about looting all the temples. Now, Persia gained a significant amount of wealth from this looting. Artaxerxes also raised high taxes and attempted to weaken Egypt enough that it could never revolt against Persia. Now, for the 10 years that Persia controlled Egypt, believers in the native religion were persecuted and sacred books were stolen. Now, before Artaxerxes returned to Persia, he appointed Pharandyrus as satrap of Egypt. With the wealth gained from his reconquering Egypt, Artaxerxes was able to amply reward his mercenaries, and he then returned to his capital, having successfully completed his invasion of Egypt. After his invasion and success in Egypt, Artaxerxes returned to Persia and spent the next few years effectively quelling insurrections in various parts of the empire, so that a few years after his conquest of Egypt, the Persian army was firmly under his control. Now, Egypt remained a part of the Persian Empire from then until Alexander the Great's conquest of Egypt. After the conquest of Egypt, there were no more revolts or rebellions against Artaxerxes' mentor and Bagoas, the two generals who had most distinguished themselves in the Egyptian campaign, were advancing to posts of the highest importance. Mentor, who was governor of the entire Asiatic seaboard, was successful in reducing to subjection many of the chiefs who, during the recent troubles, had rebelled against Persian rule. In the course of a few years, Mentor and his forces were able to bring the whole Asian Mediterranean coast into complete submission and dependence. Now, Bagoas went back to the Persian capital with Artaxerxes, where he took a leading role in the internal administration of the empire, and he maintained tranquility throughout the rest of the empire. During the last 6 years of the reign of Artaxerxes III, the Persian Empire was governed by a rigorous and successful government. Now, the Persian forces in Ionia and Lycia regained control of the Aegean and the Mediterranean Sea, and they took over much of Athens' former island empire. In response, Isocrates of Athens started giving speeches calling for a crusade against the barbarians, but there was not enough strength left in any of the Greek city-states to answer his call. Now, although there were no rebellions in the Persian Empire itself, the growing power and territory of Philip II of Macedon and Macedon itself, against which Demosthenes was in vain warning the Athenians, attracting the attention of Artaxerxes. Now, in response, he ordered that Persian influence was to be used to check and to constrain the rising power and influence of the Macedonian kingdom. In 340 BC, a Persian force was dispatched to assist the Thracian prince um, Cerso Bleptes to maintain his independence. Of sufficient evidence and sufficient effective aid was given to the city of Perinthus that the numerous and well-appointed army with which Philip had commenced his siege of the city was compelled to give up the attempt. Now, by the last year of Artaxerxes' rule, Philip II had already had plans in place for an invasion of the Persian Empire, which would crown his career. But the Greeks But the Greeks did not unite with him. Now, in 338 BC, Artaxerxes was poisoned by Bagoas with the assistance of a doctor or a physician. Back then, a lot of people would die young because they didn't have the type of medicine that we needed now to live a little bit longer. Now, here is the Battle of Issus between Alexander the Great, which is the top picture, on horseback to the left, and Darius III, the chariot to the right. And this was represented in a Pompeii mosaic dated around 1st century BC. This is in the Naples National Archaeological Museum. Down here you have Alexander's first victory over Darius, the Persian king depicted in medieval European style in the 5th century romance in the history of Alexander's battles. And Pompeii was a city that was destroyed by volcanic ash years ago. Now, Artaxerxes III was succeeded by Artaxerxes IV, Arsis, who, before he could act upon any acts, was poisoned by Bagoas. Bagoas is further said to have killed not only all of Arsis's children, but many of the other princes of the land. Bagoas then placed Darius III, a nephew of Artaxerxes IV, on the throne, and Darius III, previously the satrap of Armenia, personally forced Bagoas to swallow poison in 334 BC, when Darius was just succeeding in subduing Egypt again. Alexander and his battle-hardened troops invaded Asia Minor. Alexander the Great defeated the Persian armies at Granicus, followed by Issus, and lastly at Gaugamela. Afterwards, he marched on Susa and Persepolis, which surrendered and was destroyed by fire in early 330 BC. From Persepolis, Alexander headed north to Pasargada, where he visited the tomb of Cyrus, the man whom he had heard from the Cyropedia. And ensuing chaos that was created by Alexander's invasion of Persia, Cyrus's tomb was broken into, and most of its luxuries were looted. Now, when Alexander reached the tomb, he was horrified by the manner in which he had been treated, and he questioned them the Magi, putting them on trial. By some accounts, Alexander's decision to put the Magi on trial was more an attempt to undermine their influence and display of his own power than a show of concern for Cyrus's tomb. Regardless, Alexander the Great ordered Aristobulus to improve the tomb's condition and restore its interior, showing respect to Cyrus. From there, he would head to Ecbatana, where Darius III had sought refuge. Now, Darius III was taken prisoner by Bessus, his Bactrian satrap and kinsman. As Alexander approached, Bessus had his men murder Darius III, and then declared himself Darius' successor as Artaxerxes the fifth. Before retreating to Central Asia, leaving Darius' body in the road to delay Alexander, who brought it to Persepolis for an honorable funeral. Now Bessus would then create a coalition of his forces to create an army to defend against Alexander. Before Bessus could fully unite with his confederates at the eastern part of the empire, Alexander, fearing the danger of Bessus gaining control, put him on trial in a Persian court under his control, and he ordered his execution in a cruel and barbarian manner. Um, Now, Alexander the Great generally kept the original Achaemenid administrative structure, leading some scholars to dub him as the last of the Achaemenids. Upon Alexander the Great's death in 323 BC, his empire was divided among his generals. The Diadochi resulted in a number of smaller states. The largest of these, which held sway over the Iranian plateau, was the Seleucid Empire, ruled by Alexander's general Selu- the Seleucus one Nicator. Native Iranian rule would be restored by the Parthians of the northeastern Iran over the course of the second century BC through the Parthian Empire. Um, Now, several later Persian rulers forming the Tarakad dynasty are also known to have acted as representatives of the Seleucids in the regions of Fars. Now, they would rule from the end of the 3rd century BC to the beginning of the 2nd century BC. Um, Babars and Babars and Badfredad obtained independence around 150 BC, when Seleucid power waned in the areas of the southwestern Persia and the Persian Gulf region. Now, during an apparent transition period, corresponding to the reigns of Badfredad II and another uncertain king, no titles of authority appeared on the reverse of their coins. And you can see these coins here. These are the coins that they have in Egypt and Iran. Those look so cool. They wouldn't be useful here because foreign coins are not useful in the state in the country in the U.S. Now the earlier title Fratarkara had disappeared. Under Darab, Darius the First, however, the new title of MLK or King appeared sometime with the mention of Persis, suggesting that the kings of Persis had become independent rulers. Um, when the Parthian Arsacid King Mithridates the First, who ruled around 171 to 138 BC, took control of Persis. He left the Persian dynasty in office known as the Kings of Persis, and they were allowed to continue minting coins with the title of king. Now, with the reign of Sabur, the son of Papag, the kingdom of Persis then became a part of the Sasanian Empire. Basically, that's another video I want to do something on. Sabur's brother and successor, Artaxerxes the Fifth, defeated the last legitimate Parthian king, Artabanos the Fifth, in 224 AD, and was crowned at Catetesepsion as Artaxer, and he became the first king of the new Sasanian Empire. Now, the Achaemenid line would also be carried on throughout the kingdom of Pontus. Based in the Pontus region of the northern Asia Minor, this Pontic kingdom, a state of Persian origin, may have been directly related to Darius I and the Achaemenid dynasty. It was founded by Mithridates and around Mithridates I in around 281 BC, and it lasted until its conquest by the Roman Republic in 63 BC. The kingdom grew to its the Great, who conquered Colchis, Cappadocia, Bithynia, the Greek colonies of the Tauric Emperor, a brief time the Roman province of Asia. Now, thus, this Persian dynasty managed to survive and prosper in the Hellenistic world while the main Persian Empire had fallen. Despite Greek influence on the kingdom of Pontus, Pontics continued to maintain their Achaemenid lineage. Now, both the later dynasties of the Parthians and the Sassanians would on occasion claim Achaemenid dynasty, or descent. Recently, there has been some corroboration for the Parthian claim to Achaemenid ancestry via the possibility of an inherited disease called neurofibromatosis, demonstrated by the physical descriptions of rulers and from the evidence of familial disease on ancient coinage. Now here's a winged sphinx from the palace of Darius in Susa, and it's held at the Louvre Museum. Now Cyrus the Great founded the empire as a multi-state empire, governed from 4 capital cities: Pasargadae, Babylon, Susa, and Ecbatana. Now, the Achaemenids allowed a certain amount of regional autonomy in the form of the satrapy system, which I'm not sure what that particularly is. Okay, a satrapy was an administrative unit, usually organized on a geographical basis. A satrap was considered like a governor, and they were the governor who administered the region. A general supervised military recruitment and ensured order, and a state secretary kept the official records. The general and state secretary reported directly to the satrap as well as the central government, but at different times there were between 20 and 30 satrapies. Cyrus the Great created an organized army, including the Immortals unit, consisting of 10,000 highly trained soldiers. Cyrus also formed an innovative postal system throughout the empire based on several relay stations called Kaparkania. Now, Persepolis administrative archives provide many insights into the Achaemenid government system, and founded at Persepolis in the 1930s. They are mostly in ancient Elamite, and the remains of more than 10,000 of those cuneiform documents have been uncovered. Aramaic is represented by about 1,000 or more original records. Only one tablet in Old Persian has been identified so far. Also, many seals and seal impressions were found in these Persepolis archives. These documents represent administrative activity and the flow of data in Persepolis over more than 50 consecutive years, starting from the year 509 to 457 BC. Now, the Persian daric was the first gold coin, which, along with a similar coin, the sigils, introduced the bimetallic monetary standard of the Achaemenids, which has continued until today. This was accomplished by Darius I, who reinforced the empire and expanded Persepolis as a ceremonial capital. He revolutionized the economy by placing it on the silver and gold coinage. And you can see that gold coinage here, or bronze coinage, whatever that is that, I don't know if that's Now, Darius also introduced a regulated and sustainable tax system that was precisely tailored to each satrapy based on their productivity and their economic potential. For instance, Babylon was asserted for the highest amount and for a startling mixture of commodities. 1,000 silver talents, 4 months' supply of food for the army. India was clearly already fabled for its gold. Egypt was known for the wealth of its crops, and it was to be the granary of the Persian Empire as later to Rome, and it was required to provide 120,000 measures of grain in addition to 700 talents of silver. Now, this was exclusively a tax levied on subject peoples. There is evidence that conquered and rebellious enemies could be sold into slavery. Alongside its other innovations in administration and taxation, the Achaemenids may have been the first government in the ancient Near East to register private slave states to register private slave sales and tax them using an early form of sales tax. Um, um, Now, other accomplishments of Darius's reign included the codification of the data, a universal legal system in which would become the basis of later Iranian law, and the construction of a new capital at Persepolis. Um, Now, under the Achaemenids, trade was extensive, and there was an efficient infrastructure that facilitated the exchange of commodities in the far reaches of the empire. Now, tariffs on trade, along with agriculture and tribute, were major sources of revenue for the empire. Um, Now, the satrapies were linked by a 2,500-kilometer highway, the most impressive stretch being the Royal Road from Susa to Sardis, built by command of Darius the First. It featured stations and caravansary at specific intervals. Now, the relays of mounted couriers, the Angarium, could reach the remotest of areas in 15 days, if not sooner. But Herodotus observes that there is nothing in the world that travels faster than these Persian couriers. Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night stays these courageous couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. Despite the relative local independence given by the satrapy system, royal inspectors, the eyes and ears of the king, toured the empire and reported on local conditions that were being seen. Um, Now, another highway of commerce was the Great Cursorian Road, an informal mercantile route that originated in the fertile lowlands of the Mesopotamia and snaked its way through the Zagros Highland, now through the Iranian plateau and Afghanistan to the Central Asian regions of Samarkand, Merv, and Fergana, allowing the construction of frontier cities like Syropolis. Following Alexander's conquest, this highway allowed for the spread of cultural syncretic fusions like the Greco-Buddhism into Central Asia and China, as well as empires like the Kushan, Indo-Greek, and Parthian to profit from trade between the East and West. Now, this route was greatly rehabilitated and formalized during the Abbasid Caliphate, during which it developed into a major component of the famed Silk Road. Um, Now, despite its humble origins and process, the empire reached an enormous size under the leadership of Cyrus the Great. Cyrus created a multi-state empire where he allowed regional rulers, satraps, to rule as his proxy for over a certain designated area of his empire called a satrapy. Now, the basic rule of governance was based upon loyalty and obedience of each satrapy to the central power or the king in compliance with its tax laws. Now, due to the ethno-cultural diversity of the subject nations under the rule of Persia, its enormous geographic size, and the contrast struggle for power by regional competitors, the creation of a professional army was necessary for both maintenance of the peace and to enforce the authority of the king in cases of rebellion and foreign threat. Cyrus managed to create a strong land army, using it to advance in his campaigns in Babylonia, Lydia, and Asia Minor, which after his death was used by his son Cambyses II in Egypt against Psamtik III. Cyrus would die battling a local Armenian insurgency in the empire before he could have a chance to develop a naval force. Um, that task would fall to Darius the First, who would officially give Persians their own royal navy to allow them to engage their enemies on multiple seas of this vast empire, from the Black Sea and the Aegean Sea to the Persian Gulf, Ionian Sea, and the Mediterranean Sea. Um, um, so, the Empire's great armies were like the empire itself, very diverse, having Persians, Macedonians, the European Thracians, the Paeonians, the Medes, Achaean Greeks, Scythians, Hyrcanians, Assyrians, the Chaldeans, the Bactrians, the Sakai, the Iranians, and just so on and so on. Now the infantry, um, the Achaemenid infantry consisted of three groups: the Immortals, the Sparabara, and the Takabara. Though the latter years of the Achaemenid Empire, a fourth group called the Cardaces were introduced. Um, Now the Immortals were described by Herodotus as being heavily infantry, led by Hydarnus II, that were kept consistently at a strength of exactly 10,000 men, if not more. He claimed that the unit's name stemmed from the custom that every killed, seriously wounded, or sick member was immediately replaced with a new one, maintaining the numbers and cohesion of the unit. Back then, they used wicker shields, short spears, swords or large daggers, and a bow and arrow. Underneath their robes, they wore scale armor coats. The spear counterbalances of the common soldiery were of silver to differentiate commanding ranks. The spear butt spikes were golden. Surviving Achaemenid colorized glazed bricks and carved reliefs represent the Immortals as wearing elaborate robes, hoop earrings, and gold jewelry. Through these garments and accessories were most likely worn only for ceremonial occasions. Uh, um, Now, the Sparabara were usually the first to engage in hand-to-hand combat with an enemy. Although not much is known about them today, it is believed that they were the backbone of the Persian army, who formed a shield wall and used their 2-meter-long spears to protect more vulnerable troops, such as archers, from the enemy. The Sparabara were taken from the full members of Persian society, and they were trained from childhood to be soldiers, and when not called out to fight on a campaign in distant lands, they practiced hunting in the vast plains of Persia. Um, However, when all was quiet on the forefront, and the Pax Persica held true, the Sparabara returned to normal life, farming the land and grazing the herds. Because of this, they had lacked true professional quality on the battlefield, but yet they were well trained and courageous, to the point of holding the line in most situations long enough to hold for a counterattack. Now they were armored. They were armored with quilted linen and carried large rectangular wicker shields as a form of light maneuverable defense. Now this, however, left them at a severe disadvantage against heavily armed opponents, such as the hoplite, and their 2-meter-long spear was not able to give the Sparabara ample range to supposedly engage a trained phalanx. The wicker shields were able to effectively stop arrows, but not strong enough to protect the soldiers from spears. However, the Sparabara could deal with most other infantry, including trained units from the east. Um, Now, the Achaemenids relied heavily on archery, that's bow and arrow. Major contributing nations were the Scythians, the Medes, Persians, and the Elamites. The composite bow was used by the Persians and Medes, who adopted it from the Scythians and transmitted it to other nations, including the Greeks. The Achaemenid armies typically used socketed, three-bladed, also known as a treble light, of a Scythian arrowhead. These arrowheads were cast from the laden tin bronze, which made them amenable to mass production. Unlike the wrought iron arrowheads of the period, they had to be individually forged. Um, Now, the Takabara were rare units who were also were a tough type of peltus. They tended to fight with their own native weapons, which would have included um, a crescent-shaped light wickerwork shield and axes, as well as a light linen cloth and leather. The Takabara were recruited from territories that incorporated modern Iran. Um, Now, the Persian army the Persian cavalry was crucial for conquering nations and maintaining its importance in the Achaemenid army to the last days of the Achaemenid Empire. Now, the cavalry was separated into four groups: the chariot archers, the horse cavalry, the camel cavalry, and the war elephants. And they did have elephants back then that they used to fight. Um, In the later years of the Achaemenid Empire, the chariot archer had become merely a ceremonial part of the Persian army, yet in the early years of the empire, their use was widespread. The chariot archers were formed with lances, bows, arrows, swords, and scale armor. The horses were also suited with scale armor, similar to scale armor of the Sassanian cataphracts. The chariots would contain imperial symbols and decorations. Um, Now, the horses used by the Achaemenids for cavalry were often suited with scale armor, just like most cavalry units. The riders often had the same armor as infantry units: wicker shields, short spears, swords or large daggers, bow and arrow, and scale armor coats. The camel cavalry was different because the camels and sometimes the riders were provided little protection against enemies. Yet, when they were offered protection, they would have lances, swords, bow, arrow, and scale armor. The camel cavalry was the first introduced to the Persian army by Cyrus the Great. At the Battle of Thrymba. The elephant was most likely introduced into the Persian army by Darius II, Darius I after his conquest of the Indus Valley. Elephants may have been used in Greek campaigns by Darius and Xerxes II, but Greek accounts only mention 15 of them being used in the Battle of Gaugamela. Um, Now, since its foundation by Cyrus, the Persian Empire had been primarily a land empire with a strong army, but void of any actual naval forces. By the 5th century BC, this was to change as the empire came across Greek and Egyptian forces, each with their own maritime traditions and capabilities. Darius I was the first Achaemenid king to invest in a Persian fleet. Even by then, no true imperial navy had ever existed in Greece or Egypt. Um, Persia would become the first empire under Darius to inaugurate and deploy the first irregular imperial navy. Now, despite this achievement, the personnel for the imperial navy would not only come from Iran, but were often Phoenicians, mostly from Sudan, Egyptians, and Greeks chosen by Darius the Great to operate the empire's combat vessels. Um, At first, the ships were built in Sudan by the Phoenicians. The first Achaemenid ships measured about 40 meters in length and about 6 meters in width, and they were able to transport up to 300 Persian troops at any one trip. Now soon, other states of the empire were constructing their own ships, each incorporating slight local provinces. The ships eventually found their way to the Persian Gulf, and Persian naval forces laid the foundation for a strong Persian maritime presence there. Persians also had ships often of capacity that were 100 to 200 troops patrolling the empire's various rivers, including the Quran, the Tigris, and Nile in the west, as well as the Indus. Um, the Achaemenid navies established bases located around the Quran and in Bahrain, Oman, and Yemen. The Persian fleet was not only used for peacekeeping purposes along the Kahun, um, but it also opened up the door to trade with India via the Persian Gulf. Darius's navy was in many ways a world power at the time, but it would be Artaxerxes II who, in the summer of 397 BC, would build a formidable navy as part of as a remnant which would also lead to its decisive victory at Cnidus in 394 BC, establishing the Achaemenid power in Ionia. um, Artaxerxes II would also use his navy to later quell a rebellion in Egypt. Now, the construction material of choice was wood, but some armored Achaemenid ships had metallic blades on the front, often meant to slice enemy ships using the ship's momentum. Naval ships were also equipped with hooks on the side to grab enemy ships or to negotiate the position. The ships were propelled by sailors or manpower, but the ships the Persians created were unique. As far as maritime engagement, the ships were equipped with two mangonels that would launch projectiles such as stones or flammable substances. Now, Xenophon describes his eyewitness's account of a massive military bridge created by joining 37 Persian ships across the Tigris. The Persians used each boat's buoyancy to support a connected bridge above which supply could be transferred. Herodotus also gives many accounts of the Persians using ships to build bridges. Darius I, in an attempt to subdue the Scythian horsemen north of the Black Sea, crossed over the Bosphorus using an enormous bridge made by connecting Achaemenid boats. Then it marched up to the Danube, crossing it by means of the second boat bridge. The bridge over the Bosphorus essentially connected the nearest tip of Asia to Europe, encompassing at least some 1,000 meters of open water, if not more. Herodotus describes a spectacle and calls it the Bridge of Darius. Now, years later, a similar boat bridge would be constructed by Xerxes I in his invasion of Greece. Although the Persians failed to capture the Greek city-states completely, the tradition of maritime involvement was carried down by the Persian kings, most notably Artaxerxes II. Years later, when Alexander invaded Persia and during his advancement into India, he took a page from the Persian art of war by having Hephaestion and Perdiccas to construct a similar boat bridge at the Indus River in India in the spring of 327 BC. Now we do have some dead languages like the Aramaic language is dead. That's no longer spoken. Now, during the reign of Cyrus II and Darius I, and as long as the seat of government was still at Susa in Elam, the language of the chancellery was Elamite. This is primarily attested in the Persepolis fortification and treasury tablets that reveal details of the day-to-day functioning of the empire. In the grand rock-face inscriptions of the kings, the Elamites' texts are always accompanied by the Babylonian dialect, which was Akkadian and Old Persian inscriptions, and it appears that in these cases that the Elamite texts were translations of the Old Persian ones. It is unlikely that although Elamite was used by the capital government in Susa, it was not a standardized language of government everywhere else in the empire. Now, the use of the Elamite language is not attested after 458 BC. Following the conquest of Mesopotamia, the Aramaic language, also used in that territory, was adopted as a vehicle for written communication between the different regions of the vast empire, with its different peoples and languages. The use of a single official language, which modern scholarship has dubbed official Aramaic or Imperial Aramaic, can be assumed to have greatly contributed to the astonishing success of the Achaemenids in holding their far-flung empire together as long as they could. Now, when it comes to women and the culture of the Achaemenid Empire, the position of women in the Achaemenid Empire differed depending on which culture that they belonged to. and therefore they vary depending on the region. The position of Persian women in actual Persia has traditionally been described by mythical biblical references and the sometimes biased ancient Greek sources. Neither of them fully reliable for sources, but the most reliable references are the archaeological Persepolis fortification tablets, known as PFT, which describe women in connection to the royal court in the Persepolis, from royal women to female laborers who were recipients of food rations at Persepolis. Now, many Achaemenid rulers had built tombs for themselves. The most famous, Rostam is an ancient necropolis located about 12 kilometers northwest of Persepolis, and that's where the tombs of Darius I, Xerxes I, Artaxerxes I, and Darius II are all buried. Other kings constructed their own tombs elsewhere. Now, the Achaemenid Empire will leave a lasting impression on the heritage and cultural identity of Asia and the Middle East. And it was influenced by the development and structure of future empires. In fact, the Greeks and later on the Romans adopted the best features of the Persian method of governing an empire. Now that's all I'm gonna get. That's all I'm gonna get out for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked the video, the live stream, you can hit the like and subscribe to my channel, Rusty the King. If you want to, and make sure to smash that like and subscribe button for more videos like this. I'm gonna have to take notes on a lot of these people that I talked about today, so I can get more understanding of them. Now next week we're gonna go into either the Sasanian Empire, Santa Claus, Blackbeard, Castiel, piracy, Vikings, Samhain, Irish mythology, or Krampus, and that's it. Okay, so those videos right there will be the ones I might talk about next week, depending on which one I decide to do. Also, you guys can give me a reference about what video you guys want me to do, and we'll try to get to that as soon as possible. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll be back next week.